I need money.
Hmm.
Uh,
Okay. Okay.
it's I need money, or I need lots of money,
Yeah.
or like I need to convince investors, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. There's two parts of this. I think some people are like, I personally need a lot of money before I can start a startup because of the risk part. And then I think there's the other part where
Uh,
it's like, oh, I need to get funding before I can start a startup. So I think the first one is it's this risk tolerance kind of like thing, right? So I think some people are like, I need to have a fair bit of money in order to kind of like start a startup. And obviously, the more money that you kind of have, the more risk that you can kind of like take. And look, everybody is in a different situation, so it's hard to give kind of blanket advice here. It's like some people do kind of need more money, some people don't need as much, like that kind of thing. And so I think that one's. I don't want to give kind of just like blanket advice. Everybody's in their own situation. Maybe the thing I would say is I think you would be surprised at how little money you need to kind of get stuff like started, kind of like off the bat. Maybe this is a bigger conversation, Brian, but I think sometimes people think about starting a startup as this like really big step. It's like they got to like quit their job and have a ton of money in the bank and then you start. And I think the way to think about this is like more iteratively, where it's like, cool, start spending your Sunday afternoons working on this thing. I don't know, like put $100 into like make a landing page and like buy some ads and like you can slow put your way into it. And so I think that's kind of how I would think about it. Um, but I think people kind of sometimes think they need like a lot of money like right off the bat, and my suggestion to them is just like start small, start with a little bit. You don't have to quit your job, like you can kind of like get around with this. But I think most of the people that I know that started companies, when at least when we were young, like didn't have like a ton of money or anything like that. Probably didn't have much burn, but I think that was kind of the take. Anything you want to add on that one?
the thought that comes to mind is this one isn't really a misconception. Well,
Yeah,
like the
yeah,
misconception
100%.
is I need to quit my job.
Yeah, that's a
But this is just you have to do the math,
you got
right?
to
You
do
have to be like, okay, cool. Here's my expenses. Can I decrease my expenses? Can I change how I live? Can I actually live on 20% less? How long can I live? And you just have to do the math. The misconception, I think, is the one where you're kind of like, I have to quit my job, and you don't. You can kind of like incrementally um, start testing with nights and weekends.
and I think this is like a larger point for everybody kind of looking at misconceptions. I think if you and look, there's lots of misconceptions we're going to try to get to through some, but there's probably going to be more, and people are going to be listening to this and they're like thinking about whether the thing that the reason that they have for not starting a startup is a misconception. I think a good litmus test to kind of figure this out is just like you just kind of scrutinize it a little bit and kind of do the math. And so if you kind of do the math, I think you'll kind of figure it out. If there's a reason that's keeping you from not doing a startup, it's like just sit down and kind of scrutinize it for a moment and like do the math on it, and you'll kind of end up in a good place. And I think what you're saying is people feel like they need funding before they can start a startup.
I think so, right? You're kind of like, okay, I need to get to a place where some other person believes my company gives me X amount of money so that I can make my first like two hires, right? And um, I guess the way I would think about this is, I'm just gonna take Suka. I think that analogy is so good. That's like that is still like level,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like you haven't completed level one, level two, and you're already thinking about level five. And so maybe it's even more than level five. And
More than
so
level five.
it's another one of those things where it's kind of like, okay, funding is the result of a great product, right? Or kind of like a problem, a big problem that you're trying to solve. People really wanting what you're building, etc. So one of those kind of like you do at some point if you defeat level one through four.
I think the interesting thing that you hit on was I think there's like two parts. It's like the validation of a VC giving you money for an idea is kind of like, oh, okay, maybe this is like a thing. And then the other part is like thinking you need to like hire people to start a company. Just for context for everybody like listening to this, at Iterative, we have a hard rule. And I think almost all investors have this rule. If you are not full time kind of working on a startup, we don't invest. Right. And part of the reason we do that is because we want people to like it's our litmus test of like how much you believe in the thing. And so if you need us to tell you that an idea is a good idea, it's probably going to be a bad investment for us. Like you should believe it's a good idea, whether we think it's a good idea or not. And so that's like something we think about quite a lot. And I think other investors do. I can't think of a case where somebody raised money and they like weren't like working full time, or at least like had already quit their job or something like that. And so I think that's kind of a piece of it. The other piece I would say is that um, I think a lot of times, even if you're not building a product yet, investors, as part of the pitch, you want to be able to share kind of like what you've learned about a problem and all of that stuff. And so if you haven't even kind of like done that work, again, to the analogy of like level 5 or whatever level it is, we should map out all the levels sometime, Brian. That'd be like really fun. Here's the like startup game, and like level 1 is this, level 2
We
is that.
should, we should, we should.
That'd be really fun. But like if you are at level 1 and you're trying to beat like level 5, you haven't actually like learned enough even to kind of like raise money. And so I think that part's tricky. um Brian, maybe talk a little bit more about like, do people even need the money to kind of do that? I actually think it's a negative. Like, I think if you're starting a startup and somebody gives you $1 million, I think your chances of success actually decrease. I don't know, maybe that's a wild kind of thing, but I actually think they decrease. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's that wild, right? There's like some ceiling of money that's like good for you, and then past that ceiling, it's like bad for you because all of a sudden you're like switching modes.
Yeah.
You're switching modes at the wrong time. You're switching to the like, okay, how do I get my
Company building.
and my like VP of sales, etc. When you haven't actually figured out what is the solution? Is this a problem? Whose problem is it? Like, what is the segment that I should like focus? And so you're not working on the. A lot of money makes it so you stop working on the things that actually matter the most.
Yeah, funny thing about money, if you have $1 million in the bank, you feel compelled to use it. And so you spend all your time kind of using it instead of kind of like actually kind of like working on the problem and all of that stuff. We call it company building. And we talk often about like premature company building, where people are just like, I haven't built anything, so let me hire 5 engineers first. And it's like they hired 5 mobile engineers, and then 3 months later they found out that this works better as like a web app, and they like getting rid of mobile engineers, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is like a disaster. Okay, Brian, advice for people on this one?
And I think the advice is the same. Maybe all the advice is the same. Like, start on level 1.
Yeah.
Right? Start on level 1. Focus on the problem. Solve, like, build something that actually people want to use, no matter whatever. And okay, we should definitely map out these like levels. Yes. But you want to get to a place where you're like, you are so convinced that you should be leaving your job, right? Like building this. This is a business, and then it's super easy. Then people will give you money. Because you're convinced your thing works, people love your product, you're solving a pain point, and then you don't have to worry about this.
And I think just to add on to this, I think people oftentimes, when we see a lot of pitches, people will be like, oh, I validated an idea, or I have product market fit. And I think these words kind of get thrown all around a lot. My definition for validation is actually just like, has the founder done enough work to convince themselves that this is like a good idea or not? And I feel like that's like, I don't know if it's level 1 or what, but it's like, it is one of the first levels. Like, don't worry about whether you can convince Brian and I whether this is a good idea. You should be worried about whether you are convinced that it should be a good idea. And in order to convince yourself, you should have a high enough standard where it's like you are actually running experiments to convince yourself. It shouldn't just be like, I sat in front of a whiteboard and I made this like magical flow chart about how this is going to be $1 billion company, and I'm convinced. By the way, Brian and I have done that many times, and we were wrong every single time. So you might be smarter than us, but every time Brian and I have made some magical flow chart of how in 5 years is going to be $1 billion company, it's like a complete waste of time. Remember how much we used to like to do that? It was fun.
So many flow charts.